My name is Tom Ferko. This past year I've had the pleasure of serving alongside Louise Wong and Fred Cannon on the program committee as our program chairs. It is also my pleasure to be able to introduce our first plenary speaker of this meeting. Erica Carlson is a professor of physics at Purdue University, where she holds the title of 150th Anniversary Professor in recognition of her excellent teaching. Erica has been on the faculty at Purdue since 2003, and before that she completed her BS in physics at Caltech, California Institute of Technology, and her PhD in physics from UCLA. So it's nice to have Erica back with us in Southern California. I first met Erica when she was a respondent to one of our plenary talks during the virtual ASA meeting last summer. Erica tells me that she first became interested in the ASA when she kept running across interesting and very helpful articles on the ASA website, including The Problem of the Absolute in Evidentiary Epistemology by David Snook and Radiometric Dating, A Christian Perspective by Roger Wiens. She also credits Hugh Ross's books as helping to save her faith when she was in college. And as a result of that, she became a volunteer apologist with Reasons to Believe in the summer after she finished college in 1994. Erica comes from a large family in Alabama, and her grandfather was a Southern Baptist minister. Erica and her husband have been members of Calvary Baptist Church in West Lafayette, Indiana, since they moved to Purdue 19 years ago. Also in terms of family, Erica's family have lived in France several times, where she's worked on sabbaticals and extended research. In her free time, she enjoys playing the drums, dancing, and swimming in a pool with her 3 kids. And also, in her bio in the program, you'll see that Erica has developed a passion for popularizing science, and you can see some of the links to her work, again, in the program. So please join me in welcoming Erica Carlson as she speaks on reductionism, emergence, and free will. Are we bound by the laws of physics? Erica Carlson.
Thanks, Tom, for that great introduction, and thank you, organizers, for inviting me here. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. It's been fantastic to be in person, and it's been fantastic to reconnect with many old friends and to meet many new friends, and I look forward to many more of those conversations while we're here. So, I'll be talking to you about reductionism and emergence and freedom and whether we as humans are bound by the laws of physics, and so the implications for what it means to be human. But the start of this is really to ask the question about what makes a physical law fundamental. When we say that we've discovered a law of nature, what makes it fundamental? What makes one law more fundamental than another? And how do we go about finding the deepest and truest things about the universe? For a long time, for centuries, scientists and particularly physicists have been going about this using a philosophy called reductionism. So reductionism is the idea that I can learn the deepest and truest things about the world around us by reducing things to their smallest bits. So we took material, we took matter, and we smashed it into bits. One of physicists' favorite things to do, right? So we smashed it into bits and we found that it's made of atoms. And we didn't stop there. We took the atoms and we smashed those atoms into bits and we found that they have structure. There's a nucleus inside the atom and there are electrons swarming around the nucleus. And we didn't stop there. We tried to smash the electron to bits. Each time, by the way, we need more money to get a bigger particle accelerator. But that is a fun adventure. We tried to smash the electron to bits and never found anything inside yet. So as far as we know, there's no structure, but maybe one day with more public funding, we'll find structure there. Inside the nucleus, we found protons and neutrons, and you guessed it, we didn't stop there. We smashed those into each other, and we found that they're made of quarks, and we think that those quarks are made of strings. So you see how this goes. We keep drilling deeper and deeper and deeper. So this philosophy of reductionism has gotten us a lot of mileage. We have learned a lot about the universe, and we've learned a lot about the way the universe works. Now, this idea that you can learn the deepest and truest things about the world around us by reducing things to their smallest bits and implies some sort of hierarchy of descriptions. So you would take the thing you're interested in, drill down to the lowest level, and think about those constituents and how they behave. Okay, so this gives you the idea then that you can organize things according to this hierarchy. So let's say we start from, maybe we have something like quarks and leptons at the bottom, and then we move our way up to atoms and molecules, and you might say mini-body physics after that, or molecules, cell biology, and all the way at the top, maybe you would work your way all the way up to sociology. Now, kind of implicit in the idea that that's a good way to organize the universe is the idea that you could go the opposite direction. So, the real question is, can you build things back up? That would be called constructivism. So would it be okay to think in terms of those quarks and leptons and write down equations about the quarks and write down equations about electrons or leptons, by the way. So write down equations about those and weave everything together and weave everything together and weave everything together and then start talking about sociology in terms of quarks and leptons. Maybe not, maybe it's more useful to have intermediate levels of description, but you could also ask the question of, even if you thought that was going to work, you could ask, is it practical? Is it practically useful? No, I've never met a sociologist who starts at the level of quarks or even atoms. You could ask the question that's even deeper, is it even rational to do, even if you could do it in principle, would it be the right way to go about studying things? So that would be the idea of constructivism, that you could build things back up and somehow get a theory of everything out of that. And that's one of the things I want to question today. Now, this reductionism paradigm really is a philosophy. It's a philosophy about how to go about doing science. It's not something that we examined using the scientific method and discovered by it. It's a philosophy handed down by the Greeks. But like I said, it's been a great organizing principle for how to go about finding out things about the world around us. So this reductionism point of view, though, it does lead to a particular view of the world around us, and it leads to a particular view, really, of what it means to be human, because reductionism is working from a mechanistic point of view, from a naturalistic point of view, and ultimately a deterministic point of view. This is because if you think that the system you're studying, such as you and me or our friends, colleagues, and family members, if we think that that system is reducible entirely to its atomic constituents and its DNA, if we make the most extreme form of reductionism and say that we're nothing more than atoms, that has some serious implications for how we view humanity. And that's because atoms obey physical laws, and physical objects obey physical laws every single time. That's why we call them laws and not suggestions. Could you imagine what would happen if the electrons in your body decided to maybe half of them tomorrow are just not going to follow the laws of physics because they don't feel like it? It's not clear exactly what would happen. Maybe you would implode, maybe you would explode. Either way, it is not going to be pretty. Okay, so in a sense, we should be grateful that these particles obey the laws of physics. But again, physical objects follow physical laws every single time in lockstep. So that idea would lead you then to say that, well, if I just could measure everything about you, if you're nothing more than atoms, and if I'm nothing more than atoms, then we could measure each other's atoms. We'd need to measure the positions and the velocities with extraordinary accuracy, and then from that, using the laws of physics, we should be able to predict everything that's going to happen in your future out of that. And the troubling thing in that view of humanity is that then everything is determined, okay? Everything is determined, and it would mean that we don't actually have a choice in the matter. We don't have a say, whereas we all have this impression that we are operating under true freedom. We all have this impression that we make decisions. Now, I want to give kudos to Susan Blackmore. Susan Blackmore stated this very clearly in her book, Conversations on Consciousness. So Susan interviewed a lot of people working on neuroscience and working on the question of consciousness. And in fact, it's not just neuroscience, it's broadly speaking, consciousness is who she was interviewing, people who work on that field. And it's very interdisciplinary. It has neuroscientists, it has neurosurgeons, it has physicians, it has theologians, it has philosophers. And so she interviewed a broad swath of people working on issues of consciousness, including, are we truly free? Do we really get to make actual free will decisions? And her conclusion was that, in fact, no, consciousness is an illusion. She actually writes in the preface to her book, I know I'm not actually conscious. And she says, free will must be an illusion. So kudos to her for being so honest, okay, to say that if you view humans as nothing more than atoms and as nothing more than our DNA, then everything is determined for us lockstep by the deterministic laws of physics. And that is a very bleak picture of humanity. And it has implications for how I treat you and how you treat me, and how we structure society, how we structure the justice systems of society, for example. Now, there have been a couple of physics ideas that people have thought, maybe this physics idea will give us a way out. So what are the possible ways out? One of the possible ways out that people discuss is quantum. Anybody here like quantum? I like quantum. Okay. I like quantum so much, I recently started another YouTube channel called Quantum Coffee House, where I discuss all things quantum. So here's the question. Quantum includes randomness. In order to model quantum mechanics, we use random variables. And so there seems to be some sort of indeterminism to it. And so you could ask the question, will quantum indeterminism come to our rescue and get us out of this dilemma of how is it that we perceive at the high level that we have freedom to make choices, and yet if we're nothing more than atoms, those atoms don't have choices. Maybe quantum will rescue us, because quantum, when we look down at the quantum level, we model individual events as probabilistic events. It's just like there's a dice roll. Now, if that makes you uncomfortable, actually you're in good company. Nobody's comfortable with this, even after years of training in physics and having done all the math. By the way, a lot of quantum concepts are much more crystal clear after you spend a year wrestling with the math, but not entirely clear. It's still pretty murky. And so if it makes you uncomfortable, you're in very good company. So Einstein had this to say about it. He said, God does not play dice. That was his take on this. And Richard Feynman had this to say. Richard Feynman's a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, and he said, and you have to imagine this in his Brooklyn accent, because this is a quote from a talk he gave, you don't like it? Go somewhere else. To another universe, where the rules are simpler, more philosophically pleasing. So he just basically had the attitude of, it's what we measure. We didn't get to choose it. It's just how it is. So could it be that this quantum indeterminism comes to our rescue, and the openness implied by the laws that we use to describe the quantum world, could that openness lead to true freedom and our ability to make the kind of free choices that we think that we're making? Well, I need to let you in on a little secret, okay? It's a physics secret, but it's really actually quite public. We don't actually know whether that randomness is inherent to the fabric of nature, or whether it's just a calculational tool that we're using. It is the best thing we have. We do have, for example, Bell's theorem, and we measured then Bell's inequality, which shows us that if there are hidden variables that are determining everything in a deterministic manner, they're not local. Okay, so it's not like the electron has some script it pulls out and it says, if they ask where you are, say this. If they ask your energy, say this. There is no local script. But Bell's inequality leaves open that there could be non-local variables. Okay, so it's a highly constrained theory, which is why we continue to use the randomness, and it's a highly accurate theory to several places of the decimal, but we don't actually know. It could be that randomness that we use is just a calculational tool, okay? But let's set that aside because it's an open question. I'm optimistic, by the way, that we're gonna learn new things about it with this great big push we have, especially in the United States. We have this big push of the National Quantum Initiative, so I think we'll learn more things. I think it's an exciting time to be working in that field. But let's just say that it really is inherently random. Okay, so even if every quantum event really is like a dice roll and really is inherently random, it still doesn't lead to randomness on the macroscopic scale. So there's a couple of ways to think about this. The basic idea is that when you take random events and you put a lot of them together, the entire collective system becomes extremely predictable. The larger it is, the more predictable it becomes with more and more certainty. One way to see this really fast is to just look at the fact that casinos make money, right? So they don't know what you're going to roll on the dice. And when the cards get shuffled, they don't know exactly how the cards are going to get shuffled. All right. Assuming everyone's being honest, and we'll assume that they are being honest, they still make money because when you have enough people throwing enough dice enough times, they know how often certain things are going to come up. And they set the margin such that they always take our money on average. Now, another way to look at it is to do this thought experiment. Let's look at a bowling ball. Okay, so there's my red bowling ball on the right, and that bowling ball is made up of lots of atoms. Actually, anything you could hold in your hand has about an Avogadro's number of particles in it. So this bowling ball's got at least an Avogadro's number of particles in it. It's heavy and big. So that's at least 1 million times 1 billion times 1 billion particles. That's a lot of quantum events all rolling dice and deciding what that whole bowling ball is going to do in the next instant. So let's take that bowling ball. We're going to go to a park and find a slide. My daughter loves going down the slide. She could do that all day. So we'll take this bowling ball and put it near the top of the slide, and now we're going to let go. What's your prediction about what the bowling ball is going to do next? It rolls down the slide. It never goes up the slide, okay? Even though it's comprised of all these random events, those random events in the entire collective become entirely deterministic. So you regain determinism. You regain determinism when you go to large-scale systems. And the larger the system, the more sure you are about the outcome. So large systems still become deterministic. And then the other thing to consider about this possible way that maybe quantum indeterminism and quantum randomness could give us some freedom is that actually quantum processes, random quantum processes determining my next move and my next thought isn't what we think of as freedom to choose, right? That's not choice. It's actually worse, in my opinion. It's worse because now I'm just being buffeted by little dice everywhere. It's like I become a little Brownian particle, executing Brownian motion that's completely uncontrollable. So I think it's worse, in my opinion, and it certainly doesn't lead to this ability to actually choose. I should maybe give you a definition of what I mean by freedom to choose. I mean that there's some set of possible futures of the universe, and some action that I take freely chooses one of those, and I wasn't determined in advance. So now there's another aspect of physics. Okay, so we'll set the quantum aside. We figured out that the quantum isn't going to save us here. There's another aspect of physics that people discuss that maybe that will help us. Maybe this will help us get to actual true freedom. And this is the idea of emergence. The idea being that certain new properties and certain new physical laws even can arise at the collective level of a collection of particles. And so maybe as we think about our brains in that way, maybe emergence is going on at various levels there. And so maybe consciousness emerges that way. Maybe the ability to make free choices emerges that way. And in fact, this is a quote by Bill Newsom. Bill is a believer, by the way. Bill is professor of neurobiology and director of the Stanford Neurosciences Institute. And he had this to say. He said, "I suspect that answers will ultimately lie in a deeper understanding of emergent phenomena in complex systems." So this is a way that people have proposed to get around this. Now, so I will tell you about emergence, but let me set up first perhaps the need for emergence. This is the Mona Lisa. I'm sure you recognize the Mona Lisa, one of the most famous pieces of art in the world. And there's several things special about the Mona Lisa, but one of the things that's special about her is that she's smiling in a rather subtle way. She's smiling with her eyes. And we could ask the question, well, how did Leonardo da Vinci pull that off? How did he make it such that she's smiling with her eyes? And now reductionism gives you a strategy for how to answer that question. Okay? The reductionists would say, great, I know exactly how to answer this question. Let's go to the Louvre. We're going to take the bulletproof cover off, and I'm just going to scrape a little bit of the pigment off, to which every art lover in the world gasped in horror, as we should. But we'll just take off a little bit from the corner. And so we'll do a chemical analysis on the pigments. And if you'll just let me do a chemical analysis on the pigments, I'll be able to tell you why the Mona Lisa is smiling. That's the reductionist philosophy about how to answer the questions you ask. Now, how many people think that by doing a chemical analysis on the pigments, we'll be able to answer the question of why she's smiling? it doesn't seem like the right way to tackle that question, right? So we come up against this kind of a wall here, in that reductionism has answered a lot of interesting questions for us. It has been a good way to learn about things in science, but we find that it can't answer every question that we ask. There are certain questions that cannot be addressed by reductionism. And so here enters then my field of condensed matter physics with a different type of philosophy. So the key idea here being that reductionism fails to answer many important questions, and is emergence perhaps a better strategy? And now emergence is something that comes up firmly in my research field of condensed matter physics. And so we mean condensed, by the way, in the sense of condensation, as in gas condenses to liquid, liquid condenses to solid. And so we're really about the phases of matter and phase transitions. And in fact, what I specifically study goes way beyond solid liquid gas. In fact, there's more than solid liquid gas. If you've heard of, if you have a liquid crystal display, which you do on your thin devices, that's a different phase of matter. It's partly liquid, partly crystalline. I specifically study what electrons do inside of solids. And it turns out that electrons inside of materials have their own phases of matter and their own phase transitions. And in fact, they have many, many more phases of matter than solid, liquid, gas. They can do those kind of phases, but we also get lovely things like superconductors and ferromagnets and antiferromagnets and all sorts of interestingly textured quantum magnets and Abrikosov lattices and quantum spin liquids and anions, and it's wonderful. I really enjoy my field. But one of the important ideas that we use in order to organize this zoo of phases is the idea of emergence. And emergence is the idea that you need to have a large number of particles in order to talk about, in order to even discover certain laws of physics, okay? And I'll go through some of those examples with you in just a minute. But let me also set up the idea that one of the reasons we would go that direction is because we want to find the best explanations for things. We want to find the truest and deepest ones. And sometimes what we find then is that we need to think about what's the broadest explanation for something. So the explanation that has the broadest explanatory power is superior to some explanation that has less explanatory power, that has more narrow explanatory power. So here's an example of this idea of, well, what's the explanation with the broadest explanatory power? This is my cat Marshmallow. I named her Marshmallow because she's sweet and fluffy. And we could ask the question, why does she have fur? So maybe the answer is A, because she's Marshmallow, and Marshmallow just has fur. Maybe the answer is B, because she's a cat. Or should we answer C, because she's a mammal and all mammals have fur? You know, she's got long hair all over her body, and I've just got short fur on the top of my head, but all mammals have fur. Now, the explanation that has the broadest power to it, right, the broadest explanation is the one that's going to organize more things, and so we consider that to be superior. So the broadest answer here is the best one. So it's really, we would say she's got fur because she's a mammal, and all mammals have some sort of fur. Now, we can ask similar questions about things that are in physics, okay, like rocks. I have to admit, I love rocks. I have a rock collection. I have a mineral collection. I never get tired of it. I love rocks. So here's one of my favorite rocks. This is quartz. And you could ask the question, why is this material hard? Okay, you could ask other questions about the material, but and I'm trying not to get distracted by that because that's also very interesting, but why is it hard? And so the reductionist has an answer for you, okay? The reductionist says it's because it's made of silicon dioxide. Okay, quartz is hard because it's made of silicon dioxide. But there's a problem with that as the answer, okay? This is bismuth, another one of my favorite crystals because it's so pretty and makes the interesting little square spirals. The reductionist would say that the bismuth is hard because it's made of bismuth. Well, is that really fair? Is it fair to say this crystal's hard because it's made of silicon dioxide, but this other one's hard because it's made of bismuth? Or maybe, we could look at this diamond and say, well, it's hard because it's made of carbon. Is that really the best answer you can give? But that is the reductionist answer. So the problem is that there's something broader going on here, right? There's some sort of universality. And if there's some sort of universality, that lends itself to thinking about a universal explanation. And that's the direction that a condensed matter physicist would go with this, is that because there's similar behavior and similar outcomes, there must be similar physics involved. And so in this case, emergence gives a better answer. So emergence would tell you that you shouldn't say that this quartz is hard because it's made of silicon dioxide, because there are many hard things that are not made of silicon dioxide, right? The bismuth has no silicon in it at all, and it's also hard. The reason they're both hard is because of the arrangement of the atoms. The arrangement of the atoms inside is such that they're crystalline. So there's a crystalline periodic lockstep arrangement of the atoms in all three dimensions of space. And every single time that happens anywhere, independent of the individual constituents, you always get hardness. Hardness always arises as a result. And so this is one of the things that emergence talks to us about, all right? It's this idea that there are certain properties that arise at the level of the collective, and there are certain laws that arise at the level of the collective that really can't be described in terms of a single constituent. Can I describe hardness in terms of a single atom of silicon? Could I even discover it in the lab from a single atom of silicon? And you can't. So this is an example where emergence gives you a better answer. Let me tell you some other examples of emergence. The best way to learn about it is to just see a few examples. And so another example of an emergent phenomenon is the wave that happens in a baseball stadium. Has anybody participated in that? I have. Okay, about half of us. Actually, we kind of almost did a wave just now. And so when you see the wave in a baseball stadium, right, people stand up and they sit down and they do it in synchrony so that the wave goes around and around the stadium. And that's an example of an emergent phenomenon, all right? It's a new thing that happens. It's at the level of the collective. And you can't see it unless you have the collective doing it, all right? In fact, I know this from experience. When I was an undergraduate at Caltech, it's a small school, but they have a full athletics program. So we did have a water polo team. And my friend and I said, let's go watch the water polo team and cheer them on. And lo and behold, we were the only two people in the stands. But we decided we are going to do the wave anyway. And I'm glad you're laughing because it was exactly as lame as you just pictured. Maybe even worse, it did not work. So you need a large collection of people to pull this off, as we found out when we made fools of ourselves. But another characteristic of emergence is that what arises is independent of the constituents. So it didn't really matter when I was in a baseball stadium and a whole crowd is doing it together, it didn't matter exactly who showed up that day. It didn't matter how tall any one person was. It didn't matter what color their hair was or anything like that. It didn't matter whether it was a baseball stadium in Chicago or whether it was a soccer stadium in Rio de Janeiro. The wave is a wave is a wave every time it comes up in a stadium. And another clue that you have an emergent phenomenon is that it's quite independent of the constituents that make it up. So there's an independence there. We could switch out which people showed up and you could still make a wave. But also, it wouldn't be fair to say that all waves are made of people standing up and sitting down. And we know that because we see waves in other contexts, right? If you've looked out at the ocean while you're here, you saw waves on water, waves carried on water. And right now you're hearing my voice through sound waves that are carried through the air. So waves, however, when they come up, independent of the constituents, a wave is a wave is a wave every single time, and we always use the wave equation to describe it. So there's other emergent phenomena we could go into. We talked about waves, we talked about hardness. Wetness is another good example. So if I pour a glass of water, it's wet every single time. If I open that faucet at room temperature and at room pressure, the water comes out and it's wet. The wetness is a property that comes up at the level of the collective, and it's not something that's apparent if I just gave you one water molecule. Could you say that one water molecule is wet? Or even if I gave you two? And would you be able to describe it in terms of one water molecule? You wouldn't even be able to discover it if I only handed you one water molecule. You wouldn't have any reason to talk about wetness. So that's another characteristic of emergent phenomena. They come up with the collective, there's something that's not contained in the individual, and there's something that's independent of the individual constituents. As we said, it also happens with people waves. It also happens with other aspects of human behavior like governments and road networks and economies. You know, if you were an alien and you only visited Earth once and only met one of us, would you know that we had things like dollar bills or Canadian bills or euros or things like that? Now, we can get back to here though and say, well, all right, as we were saying, reductionism fails to answer many important questions. Reductionism failed to answer, for example, whether the Mona Lisa, how the Mona Lisa is smiling. And we could ask the question, is emergence a better strategy? Okay, is emergence a better strategy? And so will emergence come to the rescue for us? Maybe emergence could come to the rescue for us in terms of what it means to be a human, in terms of human consciousness, and in terms of this impression that we each have that we make really free decisions and we're free to choose. So could emergence come to the rescue like Bill Newsom and others have proposed? One of the problems with that is that known examples of emergence are also deterministic. Okay, so all the examples that I gave you of emergence in physical systems are deterministic once again. Room temperature water is always wet. Every single time I pour it, it's always wet without fail. Crystalline silicon dioxide is always hard every single time without fail. So we don't escape determinism by calling upon emergence. And that's because ultimately, physical objects follow physical laws every single time. That's why we call them laws and not suggestion. So while emergence can have interesting properties arise, it's not going to get us free from the determinism that's happening. It's still deterministic. However, emergence does teach us, I think, some important lessons that we can then carry into this discussion about what it means to be human. So what are some of the lessons that we learn from emergence? So lesson number 1, new entities arise at new levels. Okay, for example, the wetness arose at the level of the collective. Lesson 2, new laws arise at new levels. So if I were to write down a physical law about how wetness behaves, or to write down a physical law about hardness, then I would be looking at a level, laws that arose at that new level. And so the implication here, implication A, I'll call it, is that I think we should take high-level observations seriously. So emergence gives us warrant and gives us cause to take high-level observations seriously. They are meaningful, and they're things that we should take into account. Another thing that emergence teaches us is that different microscopic situations can lead to the same macroscopic situation. So what do I mean by that? Microscopic is about the tiny things, macro is about the large. So different microscopic situations can lead to the same macro behavior in the sense of, we saw already that silicon dioxide can be hard, as bismuth can also be hard, carbon can also be hard at the collective level. And what this means is that reductionism didn't give us the right answer there. So reductionism cannot always explain why high-level behavior occurs. There's lots of high-level behavior that isn't captured by reductionism, and in fact cannot be explained by reductionism. So reductionism, again, while it got us a lot of mileage and we learned a lot of things, it can't explain everything. It didn't even explain the behavior of the rocks, and they're a rather simple system. What else does emergence teach us? One of the other lessons we learn is that large-scale phenomena can be independent of the constituents, okay? And we also learn, in fact, that causality can flow top-down in addition to bottom-up. So if causality is flowing bottom-up, that's where you would say, that's the constructivist idea, where you'd think you could take the individual atoms, learn how they work together, and then build up to higher and higher levels. And so that would be thinking about causality flowing bottom-up. But in fact, we actually do know from our studies of emergence that causality can flow top down. The reason we know that is because it took actual experimenters to discover these laws of emergence. So it took scientists going into laboratories and working with these little particles and to discover their collective behavior. And no one thinks in that instance that the particles were controlling the experimenter. We all believe that the experimenter was the one controlling the process there. So causality can flow both ways, bottom up and top down as well. Now, there's also reason to think that some things actually are quite beyond emergence. Okay, so this would be the following concept. I've got here a few different houses to think about different building materials and houses. So think about the home you live in, okay, and I'm going to think about the home that I live in. And let's say that I invited you over, and you might walk in, and that would be your first experience of the floor plan of my house. And you could walk in and say, well, okay, here's the foyer, and isn't that an interesting floor plan? How the foyer flows into the living room, and how the living room flows into the dining room. That's a good thing they made it out of brick, so you could get that floor plan. That wouldn't quite be correct, right? I don't have that floor plan because of what my house is made of. Actually, my house is made of wood and Indiana sandstone, but it's still not that floor plan because of the wood and Indiana sandstone. And that structure isn't actually emergent. It's not like the builders took all the wood, threw it up in the air, and it self-assembled because of its own interactions into, boom, the floor plan, right? The floor plan could have been whatever was chosen by the builder, and it's independent of the constituents, right? It's not set by the constituents, but it's something that's imposed from the outside. So the floor plan is something that's transcendent. It's beyond emergence. It's transcendent. Someone from outside the system imposed it on the system. So lesson number 6, not all large-scale structure is emergent. Sometimes we have transcendence. And so this brings us back to the Mona Lisa, and how is it that she's smiling, right? So, and the question about, what does it mean to be human? Are we really just a bunch of atoms? Okay, was in her case, right? We can see transcendence coming up in her case. She's not smiling with her eyes because the pigments made it that way. She's smiling with her eyes because Leonardo da Vinci chose it to be that way. And he, as transcendent to the painting, painted that in. And so, by analogy, I think it's quite possible that the light in your eyes, the light in my eyes, the light in our secular colleagues' eyes, our secular friends and family members as well, the light in all of our eyes is actually something that's transcendent and put there by a higher being. So we need to go back and examine then this statement, all right? And this is the statement that Susan Blackmore was working under. She was working under this kind of a flow of logic. Reductive determinism precludes free will. And I agree with that. I agree that reductive determinism precludes free will. Therefore, free will does not exist. I do take issue with the therefore. Okay, I take issue with the therefore. So let's examine that therefore, all right? So the question is are human beings entirely determined by reductive determinism? And here, in fact, is what begs to differ. What begs to differ is these ice cream flavors. I love taking my kids to the ice cream store, right? Because I just love the world of wonders, and there's just a joy in watching them make decisions, and we all get there and we have to choose, and we'll try a few flavors, and it's just fun watching what decisions they make, and it's fun ourselves making that decision. So my husband and I love to take the kids out for ice cream. It's fun for everyone. And I have this impression when I go to the Silver Dipper in West Lafayette, Indiana, that when I am deciding between Snap-a-Lantern, which is ginger snap inside of pumpkin spice ice cream, or triple chocolate chunk brownie, that I'm really making a free choice. And you do too when you go to the ice cream store, or whatever it is your favorite food to choose from. And so I think that to throw this out, to say that reductive determinism precludes free will, therefore free will doesn't exist, is to throw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? It's throwing away high-level observations as though they're not meaningful. But as we saw from Emergence gives us warrant to take high-level observations seriously. So I think we should take these high-level observations meaningful. And in fact, to throw out those observations is to hold a view that's in contradiction to the data, right? In contradiction to the observation of billions of people that we make these free decisions. And so it's not just ignoring some of the data, but it's ignoring billions of data points, right? There's about 7.7 billion people on the planet, and we have this common observation that we're making free decisions. And furthermore, if your brain is lying to you about something so fundamental, right, about how you yourself operate, why should we even trust it about anything it says? So I think this does then call us to go beyond emergence and how we look at human beings. And so the last implication I want to leave you with is that there must be something more than the physical world based on our human common experience of freedom of choice, and actually being able to choose between triple chocolate chunk brownie and Snap-a-Lantern ice cream. And I will leave you with that, and I'll end here. Thanks for your attention.
All right, so we're going to take a few minutes. Let's see, right now it's 8:12, and we were to end at 8 o'clock, so we are over time, but that's good. We're going to take a few minutes and have a question and answer time. So Louise has a microphone, and she's going to be on this side. I'm going to go on the other side when we come down to the aisle. So if you have a question, please raise a hand. We're going to come out to you, and we will give you an opportunity to ask your question, and then, so just so it's recorded. So please hold off on questions. I do have one for Erica before, just to get this started. As you were talking, it just struck a memory, and I'm going to butcher this question, I'm sure, but sometimes we hear, so again, as a community of believers who are scientists, we sometimes hear other scientists who say that people who are inclined to believe in God is because of something that happened in our brains, that we're wired in a certain way to believe in God, and other people are not wired to believe in God, because when you take this reductionism down to something that's happening in our brains. So any thoughts on that?
And you're hearing this question from believers or from the secular society?
Not from believers, from secular.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, because the Christian perspective on that would be that to the extent that we're influenced by how our brain is wired, God, would want us to know about him. That's certainly, coming from a secular viewpoint, I could certainly see how people would say that. So I think that's certainly a self-consistent statement to make from the secular point of view. There's no logical contradiction within their worldview. However, you can also look perhaps about, people who have really radically changed their view on that. There's certainly been people who have radically changed their view in both directions. And so there's clearly influence beyond just your wiring, right? Your wiring would be given to you, early on, but then things that either happen to you or things that you decide, right, can change your mind on that. We certainly see people change their mind.
Questions? We're going to start with Louise.
Go ahead.
Don. Oh, here we go. It's on. What's your sense or assessment of individuals that hold a reductionist view, deterministic view, who nonetheless take the time to write books and go on tours to convince you to think otherwise?
I think your question is really answered your own question, right? I mean, I think it's interesting that they would try to influence you to change your mind, right? If you don't have freedom of choice to change your mind. But I think, I don't think it's a coherent position. but I just having listened to enough of them, I think they would simply say that they're still just doing what their atoms are telling them to do, and their atoms are telling them to do that. Yeah.
Okay, we'll take one from this side.
Thank you so much for the talk, and I tend to find it very convincing. But one thing that did come to my mind is when it comes to emergence, it seems to be that one of the big things is that examples of emergence is that they are deterministic. But somebody who wanted to defend that might say that doesn't mean they must be deterministic. Perhaps there's a sort of logical wiggle room there that with free will, that it could still be an indeterministic process.
It is true that the examples I gave you of emergence are deterministic, and the known examples where we can work it out and test it in a lab and that sort of thing and be sure that something came up because of emergence are deterministic. But I don't think you're ever going to get away from this idea that physical objects follow physical laws, right? I mean, the physical laws, again, they're not suggestions. The reason we call them laws is because the system follows it every single time. Now, you could imagine something where you have a very complex system that then becomes dependent on its own history in such a complicated manner that it becomes sort of impossible to trace it. But again, I wouldn't call that non-deterministic. I would just call that very hard to predict. Yeah.
Okay, from the back.
What if a reductionist would push back on your account of Mona Lisa? And if the question is, why are Mona Lisa's eyes smiling? You could tell a really nice kind of reductionist story that locates the reductionist account, not in the scraping the eye properties, but it would trace back to the electrochemical interactions in the particular regions of the brain that's registered for facial detection. And you can tell a really nice reductionist story that would give a fairly complete, robust answer as to why her eyes are smiling.
So yeah, that's great. That's a nice, yeah, I appreciate that. That's a nice reductionist view of my perception of it, but I don't think that that gives the reductionist view of how it is that the pigments got in that position. Does that make sense? I think you're more talking about reductionism on my perception side of things, right?
It seemed like the question was framed in terms of why does it seem like her eyes smile?
Yeah. I did mean it more of an ontological question about her rather than about me, the perceiver. But I see that you could cast the question a different way.
Okay, we're going to take a question from the other side.
Thank you very much for the talk. I stole this question from Douglas Hofstadter. So, you have a parallel where you start with basic objects and they're determined, and you went to emergence, and emergence things, once you sort of really understand them, are determined. And then we went to transcendent, and we talked about choosing ice cream. And yeah, we have free choice, but anyone will tell you that if I go to the ice cream store, I'm going to get mango and coffee every time. And I'm never going to choose mint chocolate. Like, there's something about the will that is not law determined, but consistent. Mm-hmm. And in some sense, that sort of personality, that's what a human being is a consistency in their choices. So is there something to be said in sort of how you've built this up? Is there a parallel there? I'm just very open-ended.
That's an awesome. We've opened up, I think, a very awesome conversation about personalities. I agree with it that some of us are much more consistent in our choices than others, right? So I was much more consistent. Personal story time. I was much more consistent in my food choices before I got married, and my husband loves to cook, and he really greatly, expanded my food repertoire. So before I got married to him, I would have been happy. I kid you not, if they had made Purina human chow, I would have been happy to just eat it and get on with my life and get back to studying physics. So I'm really grateful that he brought in my perspective. And so now that he's done that, now that I've had that experience, with him training me to enjoy, eating a variety of foods, I actually find it much more difficult to choose things now from a menu. But I'm well aware that some of us are very much, I want to eat the exact same thing every time. Isn't there any decision you struggle over, though? Maybe for you it's not that. Isn't there some other decision?
Obviously, there are times.
But it's not about, the mango ice cream is pretty set for you. Yeah. And that's just, that's it.
Okay, other questions? Just put a hand up if you have a question. Get one from back here. Okay.
Oops. I hope I make some sense. But one thing is, I'm trying to understand what you mean by transcend. You mentioned that Mona Lisa is smiling because the artist transcends and drew Mona Lisa that way, right? My question is, the transcending determining the outcome? So if I transcend something, right, there's going to be some scenarios that are determined because that's how the laws of physics work. And if transcending is determining something, are we transcended? Are we also transcendental beings when it comes to God transcending us? I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but.
It's a great question. So I think what you've done for me is open up. Maybe we need to examine a little bit more carefully what it means for Leonardo da Vinci to be transcendent over the Mona Lisa. and what it means for God to be transcendent over us. So I highlighted a similarity. A similarity is that certain things about the Mona Lisa were given to her by her creator in the same way that certain things about us are given to us by our creator. Now but in Leonardo da Vinci's case, she didn't have any, she's not given any freedom by him. He doesn't have the power even to give her freedom. So what I'm trying to argue is that there must be some non-physical component to humans, because physical objects follow physical laws. And so the only way to escape that would be if there's some interaction that we have with something non-physical, which in the Christian theology would be our spirit given to us by God. And furthermore, that God has powers that we don't, right? Him being God. So I don't have the power to create anything that is in and of itself going to be free, right? But I'm trying to make the argument that he, being God, does somehow, in a way that I do not claim to understand in any way, it's a total mystery to me, that somehow he has the ability through the spirit that he's endowed us with to give us the capacity to make truly free decisions. I hope that kind of clarified it a little bit, right? I was making a similarity, but you brought out the differences, right? There's a huge difference between Leonardo da Vinci and God. And you can all quote me on that. Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Quick question. I love your lecture, particularly because you take something very complex and you did it very simply. But I'm very curious, how well has it worked with your secular colleagues who tend to be reductionists? And have you noticed any trends with how well it's worked?
I see. Well, now I have to confess, I'm much better at public evangelism than private evangelism. So I wish I had tons and tons of data of private conversations, but I don't. I have little bits and snippets here and there. However, I can tell you that in the parts of this talk that have been reviewed by colleagues, they were pleased with how emergence is discussed, okay? So I gave, for example, a TEDx talk that's a much, much, much condensed version of this. And I was very pleased that, colleagues in my field felt like that was properly representing the idea of emergence. And so, I use this idea just as kind of as an opener. I've never, basically just along the lines of, look, if you really are nothing more than atoms, then we're not free, we're not making decisions. Are you okay with that? And it's just I'm just using it as a little nudge to make people uncomfortable. And hopefully it gets them thinking about it down the road. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll take one over there and then one more on this side.
Okay, so my question is then, hello over here.
Thank you so much. You could tell I'm looking at it. Okay, thank you.
With this, it sounds to me like you're getting to is a dualistic kind of idea. So my question is there any room or potential space that you know of for a sort of integration center in which we could trace a sort of soul, a free-willed thing into a dimension that might just be difficult to understand, but it's more of a spectrum reaching out into an everlasting world instead of this kind of wall that draws a line?
I'm open to that. I mean, I'm not giving any particular model of exactly how it is that our physical being interacts with the spiritual. I have no idea, and I also have no idea how to test that at any kind of microscopic level. And so, I'll tell you the way I think of it. I love the two ways that you just described it are very beautiful. And the way that I think of it is this is going to be amusing only to the physicists, but I think of a Hamiltonian. So the Hamiltonian is an equation that we write down that includes the interactions between things in a system. Okay, it includes all the energies in a system, and I just think of it as this fact that we perceive that we have free will, and yet we don't know where it comes from. I perceive it as some term in the Hamiltonian that we just don't know about. We don't know what it is. We don't know how it operates, and I think, by the way, I think that's a valid way to be making inferences about things. This is how we've discovered a lot of fundamental particles in the past. We saw that behavior was happening, and the terms we had in the Hamiltonian so far just didn't describe it. And so it led people to say there must be something more. There must be, in that case, another particle. And I'm sort of extending that to say there must be something more. And in this case, I think that something more is non-physical spiritual. And no, I don't have an equation to write down about that. But I am thinking of it as like the missing term. And I look forward to God explaining that to me one day in heaven.
Are you?
Oh, good. There you are.
They're
Hi.
done.
Yeah.
Hi.
If you could just raise your hand when you're talking, that'll help. Thanks.
Okay, so you talked about like the reductionism and then the emergence and the transcendence, and obviously to me it sounds kind of like they scale up or down depending on like the system that you're using. And then you had also talked about waves and about how waves can be described on kind of like the atomic level or like the smaller level with like light waves and sound waves and stuff like
Right.
that, and then on very large scale levels with things like ocean waves or human waves. Like, ooh. So I guess my question is kind of, is emergence similar and transcendence similar in the fact that like emergence seems like it has a very broad range of areas that it can be applied to.
Right.
Is transcendence similar to that, or I guess how is transcendence separate from the idea of emergence, and how do the idea of like obviously the reductionism and emergence kind of interact in the way that like reductionism is a less complete answer in some cases than emergence? Is that a similar concept for transcendence where it kind of covers a little bit more of the spiritual realm of things?
Yes, that's the short answer to what you just said. Yes. So I agree with how you just described things. Okay, so what I meant by transcendence is that there's something from the outside, completely outside of the system that you're looking at. When emergence comes up, at least in physics, we're talking about a system that has emergence happening within itself. It's not imposed from the outside. It's actually that system collectively due to its interactions. And also, just to be fair, this is a highly technically trained audience, so I'll tell you a little bit more about what controls the type of emergence that comes up. You need the physical dimension that the system's happening in, typically 3 dimensions, but we can make 2-dimensional systems in the lab or 1-dimensional systems in the lab, and we theorists get to think about 4 or 5 and infinite dimensions because, hey, why not? So the number of physical dimensions matters as far as what can happen, and then the boundary condition of the system. And those sort of things set the kind of emergence that can come out, and the interactions in there set it. So when I was talking about transcendence, I meant something completely outside of that system, imposing something back in. So it could be, for example, in the example I gave of the experimenter would be transcendent to the physical system being studied because they're completely outside of it and independent of it, yet they can make changes to it. Leonardo da Vinci was transcendent to the Mona Lisa. He's completely distinct from her, completely not neither one is a part of the other, and yet he can influence her from the outside. And then God would be transcendent to us. He's completely distinct from us, and yet he can influence us from the outside. So I was trying to make the argument that the spiritual component, there is a component to humans that is beyond physical, that is spiritual. And that God is transcendent to us, and actually the spiritual component of us as well is beyond that.
All right, now we have a lot more questions. We're going to take 2 more back here, and then we're going to take 1 from the front. So we're going to start back here.
Erica, this question of whether or not emergence can get us out of determinism, can reduce the determinism, seems to me that it might tend the other way, that there's a lot of cases where emergence will be more deterministic. For example, radioactive decay, you don't know when an individual atom is going to decay, but if you take an ensemble of them, a large number, it's very deterministic what's going to happen. So any comments?
That's a good way to think of it. So I think I see what you're saying. I think the way that I would say it is that because there are large swaths of microscopic circumstances that can all lead to the macroscopic behavior, then that's sort of more deterministic because it narrowed the possibilities. The emergence itself narrowed the possibilities. There were all these microscopic circumstances like silicon dioxide, carbon. The other one I gave, I guess, was bismuth, that all became hard whenever they went crystalline. So I think we're talking about it in the same way. And I will step away from whatever speaker gave the feedback.
Thank you for your lecture. I think I would agree with you.
Where is this question asked?
Oh, right here.
Okay.
I think I would agree with you that deterministic models are conceptually and explanatorily constrained, necessarily. And so your model gains some sense of prominence beyond them because they seem to make sense of a phenomenon that we experience, the abundance or richness of human experience. But I'm wondering, with all the models and examples you've presented, your model is also conceptually explained. And so you've got two competing conceptual models, and yours, as I said, because it explains phenomenon more, seems to have greater explanatory power. But then I wonder where your model becomes truth tracking. In other words, I'm asking where you move from epistemology, which is what your model really exemplifies, against another model, to becoming ontologically relevant. So how does it become truth tracking?
That is an excellent question. Are you a philosopher?
I think so.
Okay. So so let me define terms so I can see if I understand what you're saying. Ontological, I think, is about the object we're describing, and epistemological is about how I know something about that object. What do you mean by truth tracking? I don't actually know what you mean by truth tracking. Oh, he needs the mic again. Tell me what truth tracking is.
Meaning something that represents the world. So it's a realistic correspondence theory that represents, so that your language actually maps onto chunks of the world, rather than merely being something that is empirically adequate. Because models are empirically adequate, and you can have empirical adequacy without truth tracking or without realism. You don't need that for empirical adequacy. So in other words, your model might have greater explanatory power, but it doesn't rise above other models.
That's an excellent comment, and I look forward to talking to you more about that, because I need to understand more about the question, but I very much thank you for the question. I really look forward to digging in with you about that. And so the current answer to your question is, I don't know.
Okay, I think we have one more from the front there. Louise, do you have that one?
There we go. Thank you for your talk. I am not a philosopher, so hopefully this will be easier. You often say that, you've been saying that physical items obey physical laws. And so I was wondering, as a biologist, in the world, like there are certain, we like to say, predispositions in our behavior. I'm harking back to the personality questions, right? And particularly in healthcare now, this idea that what we've experienced or what our pre-generations have experienced have health implication that is somewhat deterministic, right? And I'm using that word maybe a little bit loosely, but can you respond to, when you think about your thoughts on reductionism and determinism, how that extrapolates in your thinking or in your conversations about human behavior and in our society, particularly given, I'll just stop there.
Oh, great question. Thank you so much for the question. And of course, I'll just remind people, as our philosopher friend so eloquently pointed out, I'm just a physicist. This is why I'm excited to be in this interdisciplinary room with so many other disciplines like philosophy and like medicine. And so, on this idea of how, the implications maybe for medical care, or even the implications of how we treat each other, or what we expect of each other, I think if we are just, if we view human beings as just a collection of atoms and nothing more, and that's that extreme reductionism viewpoint, then we're not responsible for our personal choices. It's sort of, I think it's a little bit unsettling, because it absolves me of my moral culpability when I do something that harms another human being. You just say, oh, it was just your atoms. Now you could look at it still from a behavioral correction aspect and do things, impose things from, the justice system could impose constraints on me to correct my behavior so that I don't do it again. But I'm still not guilty, right? There's nothing for me to feel remorse about. And so I'm not sure how, I prefer to, I think we're going to get more traction as far as people changing their own behavior if they feel responsible for their own behavior. And we even see this in again, I'm not a medical professional, and I suspect that you're highly trained in that field. Like people would hate me as a doctor, right? If I were a doctor, I would make people who come to me, they'd have to fill out a 1-week questionnaire of everything that went into their mouth that week, and we'd have conversations about, diet and exercise before treating whatever the other thing is. So, there's, it's helpful, of course, to understand all the inputs to something, right? I mean, I don't want us to be oversimplistic in how we look at things. Of course, we have certain proclivities. Of course, the way my body behaves is largely set by my genes. But I also believe that I have free will choices that I can make, so I never like to look at anything as all or nothing, right? It's not all. I don't view us as all genes and nothing else, and I don't view it as all under my control and nothing else. Some people, no matter how hard they try, will have heart problems, okay? But then they have choices that they can make. So I think it helps us to have the full picture, right? The full picture of, yes, there are physical components that contribute to these that are happening to you, and we can treat the physical side, but there's also the behavioral side that we can and should encourage people to make wise and healthy choices. These are the kind of implications that I think come from how we view humans.
All right, let's thank Erica again for such an engaging talk.